"You never listen," she said, her arms crossed, eyes flat, standing barefoot on the kitchen tile like the room belonged to her and I was lucky to be in it. She didn't say it with anger, not even frustration, just fatigue, like I was the last unpaid invoice in a stack she couldn't be bothered to chase anymore. Normally, I'd clarify what I'd said, offer context, apologize even if I wasn't sure what for. That reflex had worn into me over the years, but this time I didn't respond. I looked at her, nodded once, then turned back to the sink and kept rinsing the coffee mug in my hand. Her voice followed. "That's exactly what I mean. You shut down, you don't engage, it's like talking to a wall." But I wasn't shut down, I was awake, more awake than I'd been in months, maybe years, because when she said those words, "You never listen," I didn't hear an accusation. I heard a permission slip. Permission to stop translating myself. To stop folding into her expectations like origami, trying to look like something she'd understand. It wasn't a breaking point. It was a quiet, efficient exit point. The end of a script I didn't remember agreeing to read from. I didn't argue, I didn't sigh, I didn't ask what she meant. I just took note of the sentence and filed it away. Not to retaliate, not even for clarity, just as a marker. The moment I stopped trying to be heard and started listening differently. We moved through the rest of the day like any other. Groceries, a movie she half-watched while scrolling. Her foot touched my leg on the couch. Habit, not affection. I didn't move, I didn't lean in, I didn't say a word she didn't notice, and that was the real sentence. Not the one she spoke, but the one she didn't. She didn't ask why I was quiet, didn't check in, didn't reach, because she thought I was still in it, still arguing silently, still buried in my stubborn pride or distracted by work. She didn't see that I was no longer sitting in the same conversation at all. She talked about her coworker's baby shower. I nodded, asked the right questions, made the right sounds, but something had shifted. My responses were functional, not emotional. I was gathering data, not participating. She poured herself a glass of wine, left mine untouched. That used to mean something. Tonight it didn't register. She looked up at one point and said, "You're being quiet tonight." I smiled. "Am I?" She shrugged. "Yeah, but whatever. You'll talk when you're ready." She was wrong, I was ready. I just wasn't going to talk to her anymore. Not in the way I used to, not with the kind of energy that comes from hoping to be understood. She thought I was still playing the game, still fighting for footing in a conversation she controlled, but I'd already stepped off the board. She kept speaking like I was still in the room, but I was. I had heard enough. And if she thought I never listened, then she'd never notice how much I'd already heard. The message lit up while she was slicing lemons. Casual, fast. Her phone sat face down on the counter, but the notification preview still appeared across the top before it dimmed. "Dinner soon, babe." The name was Tyler R. No heart, no emoji, but it didn't need one. The message was too familiar, too timed. It landed at 5:43 p.m., the exact minute she normally left the office. She didn't flinch when she saw it, didn't grab the phone to hide it, just kept slicing, blade tapping calmly against the cutting board. So I didn't react either, not outwardly. I turned back to the fridge and pulled out the herbs she'd asked for, placed them by the stove, and watched her from the corner of my eye as she wiped her hands and finally checked the screen. She didn't reply right away. She locked the phone and slid it into her pocket without a word. That was the tell. Because if it had been nothing, if Tyler R. was a colleague, a cousin, an old friend, she would have said something. This client's texting again." Or, "That's weird, my cousin's trying to make plans." But she didn't. And silence, I'd learned, is only honest when it's not covering something. She asked me to grab the garlic. I did. She went back to humming along to the playlist, one of those curated dinner prep soundtracks she played to feel relaxed, expensive, curated. But her hum was a beat off. That night while she showered, I typed Tyler R. into the search bar of her iPad. She desynced her messages months ago, back when she asked me to fix her iCloud issue. I hadn't looked before. I never wanted to. But now I wasn't looking for confirmation. I was looking for understanding. There were only two messages. One from 2 weeks ago, Tyler R., same hotel, same room, and her reply, "Always." No timestamp on the first one. But the reply was sent at 10:36 p.m. That was the night she said she'd gone out with coworkers for a late bite after a project deadline. She'd come home smelling like sandalwood and spearmint gum. Claimed she'd been stuck in someone's car because of the rain. That was the first story I'd half swallowed. Now I saw it in reverse. She wasn't scrambling to cover a mistake. She was living a pattern, repeating a ritual: hotel, room, same, always, and yet I didn't screenshot it. Not yet. I didn't copy the messages or forward them or print the thread. I simply stared at the words and listened to the sound of the water running behind the bathroom door, to the way she hummed in the shower like everything was still in her control. I slipped the iPad back where it was, closed the lid. When she came out, wrapped in a towel, hair dripping, she smiled at me. "Can you bring me the moisturizer from my drawer?" I walked to her side of the bedroom and opened the drawer where she kept her night creams, her lip balms, her secret routines. The moisturizer was right on top. So was a folded receipt, hotel letterhead, room number circled in pen. I handed her the cream. Didn't say a word about the paper. She leaned in and kissed my shoulder. "Thanks, babe, you're sweet," I smiled. "Always." She didn't hear the echo, but I did. She changed her perfume. That was the first tangible shift I noticed after Tyler R. The scent was soft, citrus forward, unfamiliar. Not the one I gave her for our anniversary 2 years ago. The one she used so sparingly I thought it meant something. I didn't ask. I watched. She sprayed it behind her ears before work, not when she came home. She started locking the bathroom door when she got ready, something she hadn't done since our second year together. Her car was vacuumed mid-week. A new cardigan appeared, expensive, cream-colored, and not her usual taste. When I asked where it was from, she blinked like she hadn't rehearsed the answer. "Oh, I think I ordered it a while ago, just showed up." There was no return label in the trash, no packaging in the bin. That night I started the file. On a USB drive I'd tucked inside the cover of an old French novel she never opened, I labeled the folder "Event Planning Receipts." Inside, 2 screenshots, one of Tyler's message, the other of her always reply. No commentary, no emotion, just the beginning of a chronology. She wasn't panicking, she didn't know. In fact, she got bolder. She started playing music in the car again, upbeat, curated playlists that made her feel new. I knew because I checked the Bluetooth history. She drove to places that weren't her gym or office or therapist. She deleted her location history, but not her gas station stops. The gaps were telling. One Saturday afternoon she claimed she needed mental space and went out for a solo walk. I watched her location ping from the parking lot of a boutique hotel 20 minutes away. 2 hours later she returned in a different shirt. Her eyes were glassy. She smiled as she set a box of pastries on the counter. "I got you something." She lifted the lid. "Your favorite." They were, which is what made it worse. I took one, said thank you, kissed her cheek. She leaned against the counter like she'd done something generous, something close to love. I nodded and mentally noted the time: 4:12 p.m. to 6:31 p.m. unaccounted for, added to the file that night, along with a photo of the hotel she'd visited, pulled from Google Maps. She fell asleep on the couch while we watched a show she used to love. I studied her face, not in anger, in curiosity. What story had she told herself to let this version of us survive? She'd grown confident in my silence, my routine, my unwillingness to dig. She mistook my stability for blindness, so I gave her more silence. I kept smiling, I kept noting. And when she bought a new journal, left it face up on the table like bait, I didn't open it. I didn't need to. She wanted me to confront her, to give her a villain to justify the ending she'd already written. Instead, I gave her quiet, a calm so complete she couldn't tell if she'd won or lost. That's the trick with deceit, it needs resistance to survive. Without confrontation, her story had no shape. I wasn't giving her one, I was giving myself time. She loved hosting, said it made her feel grounded. That was the word she used, always in that polished, self-aware tone, like she was the curator of a life worth displaying. That Friday night, she planned everything down to the cheese pairings, cleaned the kitchen twice, rearranged the living room pillows in a way only she noticed. And when the doorbell rang, she opened it with a laugh so bright it felt foreign. "You made it," she called out, hugging one of the couples we hadn't seen in months. I stood back, holding a bottle of wine, letting the performance unfold. There's a particular kind of charm that only activates in front of others. She had it in spades: affectionate touches, shared inside jokes, generous laughter at other people's stories. But more than anything, she had timing. She knew when to throw her head back, when to squeeze my hand, when to look at me like I was still hers. And in front of an audience I played along. Because the more she tried to sell the story, the more convinced I became that she was scared. Dinner was beautiful, the food, the lighting, the music all calibrated, and midway through one of her old friends asked how we were doing. "We're great," she said quickly, too quickly, turning toward me. "Right, babe?" I smiled and raised my glass. "Perfect." She squeezed my thigh under the table. I didn't react. Later, as the others lingered around the kitchen island, she poured wine with a rhythm that didn't match her usual control. She was a little too talkative, asked about other people's lives with a brightness that felt rehearsed. And then he arrived, Tyler. He came late, alone, said he'd been wrapping up a meeting nearby. She introduced him like an afterthought. "Oh, you haven't met Tyler, have you?" As if he were a peripheral coworker, nothing more. He shook my hand, firm but quick. "Good to finally meet you, man," he said. I watched her carefully. She didn't touch him, didn't make eye contact for longer than she needed, but her posture changed, straighter, like she was being watched from two directions. I offered him a drink. He declined, said he couldn't stay long. 10 minutes later, he was gone. She cleared the dishes like nothing happened, but her smile didn't reach as far. And when we stood alone in the kitchen, her back to me, scrubbing a plate that was already clean, I said, "He seemed nice." She turned slowly. "Who?" "The guy you introduced me to, Tyler." Her face barely flickered. "Oh yeah, he's fine, bit intense, doesn't usually come to things like this." "Interesting." She dried the plate, set it down. "Why?" "Just trying to remember if you've mentioned him before." She shrugged. "Probably not, he's new-ish." I nodded and walked past her, gently tapping the USB drive in my pocket. Later that night, after the guests were gone and she fell asleep with one arm draped over my chest like nothing had changed, I added 3 new entries to the file. Tyler introduced at 9:12 p.m., her visible shift in demeanor. His absence logged by 9:27 p.m. Too short for someone invited, too present for a stranger. The next day she brought up how nice the party was. Said it felt like the old days. I smiled and agreed. And while she packed leftovers into Tupperware with light humming under her breath, I stood at the edge of the room, watching the woman who still believed she was writing the script. She hadn't realized I stopped reading it weeks ago. The turning point wasn't a moment, it was metadata. I had mirrored her phone weeks earlier, quietly, surgically. A few lines of code, one forgotten password, and just like that, her second life began sinking to mine. It started with calendar entries. She used aliases, short, opaque notes that tried to look like professional tasks. L session, check-in, client prep. But they didn't match her work calendar, not even close. I checked the address history on her navigation app, cross-referenced dates. The entries lined up with hotel visits, not boardrooms. She didn't realize her Bluetooth history logged every connection. I knew which rooms she visited based on the devices her phone had paired with Tyler's iPad, a hotel bar speaker system, a rental car stereo. She'd been careful but not careful enough. On a Tuesday morning, she left for a team meeting. I waited until she pulled out of the driveway, then walked into her office and opened her desk drawer. Inside, her backup planner, the paper one. Most pages were empty. She'd stopped using it for work after switching to digital. But 2 weeks ago, she'd written a single line across Friday's square. Cottage Grove, 4 p.m., back sat. No meeting, no flight, no mention of a conference call. Cottage Grove was 40 minutes away, too far for errands, too close to book a hotel under travel necessity. I returned the planner, aligned it perfectly, and left the room. That night she mentioned a colleague was visiting from out of state. "He's doing a workshop and I might need to show him around Friday." I nodded. "Of course." "You want me to drive you?" she laughed. "No, it's fine, he's bringing a car." That was the first time she referred to her guest as a he. It slipped out, she didn't catch it, but I did. On Friday afternoon, I left work early, drove to a small overlook near Cottage Grove, waited. At 3:52 p.m., her car passed me. She didn't see mine, too focused on the directions her phone whispered to her through Bluetooth. She turned into a bed and breakfast, secluded, clean, too charming for business. I waited 10 minutes, then drove past the entrance, parked 2 blocks down, walked the rest of the way. From the sidewalk, I took one photo, her car in the gravel lot, another beside it, black, rental tagged, windows tinted. I didn't need to see who was inside, I already knew. That night she came home exhausted, said the workshop had gone late, that her colleague was intense, that she was too old for these networking things. She laid her head in my lap while we watched an old movie. "Missed you," she murmured, eyes closed. I ran my hand gently over her hair. "Me too." In the file I added, 3:52 p.m. car spotted 4:03 p.m. entered B&B 9:44 p.m. car returned, no confrontation. No questions, because the deeper I went the clearer it became she wasn't slipping. She was choosing the thrill, choosing the risk, choosing him, and I was choosing not to stop her. Not yet. The next layer didn't come from her texts or her calendar. It came from the one place she still assumed I never looked, the bank. Our finances had always been mine to manage, not because she wasn't capable but because she said it stressed her out. Early in our marriage, she'd hand me the receipts and say, "You've got the brain for this." She was grateful then. Later, she was indifferent. Eventually, she was annoyed by the updates. "I don't need a spreadsheet every month," she once snapped, scrolling through her phone while I tried to explain a missed payment on her card. So I stopped sending spreadsheets, but I never stopped watching. On a Sunday morning, she left for yoga, said she needed the movement. Her mat was still in the trunk from the week before. While she was gone, I opened our joint account and scanned through the last 6 months. Most expenses were familiar: groceries, utilities, her boutique skincare subscription. But a pattern began to emerge: 4 transfers a month, always between $1,800 and $2,200, labeled consulting retainers. The receiving account was unfamiliar: RDS Solutions LLC. I looked it up. It wasn't a business, not really. It was a shell filed under an online incorporation service 6 months earlier. The mailing address was a UPS store in a neighboring city. No employees listed. No public records. But I didn't need those, because 2 minutes later I searched RDS in her email archive and found the match. Not in her inbox, in her sent folder. To Tyler R. Subject, first transfer complete. Body, keep everything labeled as consulting. That way it won't raise questions. Let me know if you need more next month. The date on that email was nearly 5 months ago. She hadn't just been spending time with him, she'd been funding him, quietly, consistently, from our account. For what? His rent, his startup, his silence. I didn't know yet, but I was done assuming this was only about emotion. She came home an hour later, flushed and glowing. "Hot class," she said, dropping her keys on the table. Everyone looked like they were about to pass out. I asked how her friend Claire was doing. She paused for half a second too long before answering. "She didn't make it today." "Ah," I nodded. "Hope she's okay." She smiled, kissed my cheek. "You're sweet." I didn't ask anything else. I spent the rest of the day doing yard work, returning calls, making dinner, business as usual. That night while she showered, I transferred every bank statement from the last year to a private drive, created a PDF of her email to Tyler, took screenshots of the RDS transfers and matched them to the calendar entries from her phone. No commentary, no summaries, just evidence. This wasn't betrayal anymore. This was leverage. This was leverage. When she came to bed, she curled into me like nothing had shifted. "You've been quiet lately," she said softly. I turned out the light. "Long day." She accepted it. She had no reason not to. She still believed I was numb, passive, dull with routine, but I was methodical now, and she had no idea because she thought she was managing a lie. She didn't realize she was building a case. It happened again over breakfast. Same tone, same phrasing, same dismissive sigh. "You never listen." She was staring at her phone, swiping through photos of her friend's newborn. I'd asked a simple question about her car registration. She hadn't answered. I repeated it calmly. That was her response. No eye contact, no thought, just that well-worn phrase. But this time it landed differently. It didn't cut. It confirmed. I stood at the counter, coffee cooling in my hand, and looked at her like a stranger. She didn't notice. She was in leggings, hair in a loose knot, sipping green juice like she was rebuilding herself from the inside out. Clean diet, new skincare, fresh playlists, resetting her body as if that would erase what she was doing to both of ours. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked to the sink, rinsed my mug, and placed it in the dishwasher with quiet precision. She sighed again, as if my silence was the inconvenience, not the weight behind it. "Forget it. It's not that important." I dried my hands on the dish towel. "Right?" She looked up at that. "Seriously?" I said, "Right." Her brow knit slightly, but she moved on. She always moved on. Later that morning, she asked if I could pick up her dry cleaning on the way home. I said yes. I picked it up, took photos of the invoice, matched the pickup date to a day she claimed she'd been home sick. a silk blouse, a pair of heels, a dress she'd never worn in front of me. The patterns were consistent now. Monday meetings that ended with no calendar trace. Fridays that began with fabricated errands and ended with unexplained fatigue. Bank transfers labeled consulting. A second phone, briefly visible in her gym bag, screen cracked. Not the phone I mirrored. She was getting careless, or confident, and I didn't correct her. That night she brought wine into the living room and curled beside me on the couch. A romantic comedy played, one of her favorites. She laughed at the same lines she always had, quoting punchlines like reflexes. At the end, as the music swelled and the credits rolled, she turned toward me and said, "You used to hold me during this scene." I met her eyes. "Did I?" She studied me for a moment. "Yeah, but maybe I'm misremembering." "No," I said quietly. "You're remembering something, just not all of it." She tilted her head. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer. Instead, I stood and walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and looked out the window as if she hadn't said a word. She followed a minute later, standing in the doorway. "Are we okay?" I turned back to her. "You tell me," she hesitated. "You've been weird lately." I nodded once. "I know." The silence stretched between us, not awkward, just clean. Eventually she turned and walked away, muttering, "You never listen." There it was again. Only this time I welcomed it. Let it hang in the air like a tolling bell. Because when someone says something often enough, it stops being language and becomes a symptom. She was still playing the role, still speaking in reflexes, believing the sound of control was the same as having it. But I wasn't listening to the words anymore. I was listening to the structure underneath them, the cracks, the shifts, the panic buried in repetition. She thought I was checked out. She didn't realize I was checking boxes. I waited until the house was silent. She had gone to bed early, claiming a headache. I knew better. Her headaches had become common after her Friday disappearances. A tell she probably thought made her look fragile. I watched her brush her teeth with mechanical calm, pull on one of my old t-shirts like that gesture still meant something, and disappear beneath the sheets without a good night. That was the last time she went to bed believing I was still hers. I sat at the dining table, printed the file I'd built over 7 weeks, bank statements, email screenshots, GPS logs, the B&B receipt she thought she'd shredded, a printed calendar with her coded entries marked against the timeline. I printed it all. I didn't label it. I didn't annotate it. The truth didn't need a translator. On top of the stack, I placed a single page, typed, centered, simple. I listened. I heard everything. This is me leaving mid-sentence. I slid it all into a manila envelope and left it on the kitchen island, right next to the coffee pot. The same place she used to leave me grocery lists and apology notes back when we still tried to patch things. This wasn't a note. This was the close of ledger. The spare key I kept on my ring, hers, went on top of the envelope. I didn't pack much. One bag already staged in my car, essentials. The drive I'd mirrored her phone to, my documents, the file copy. There was no goodbye. No door slam. No symbolic glance back at the bedroom, just the steady rhythm of reclaiming my time. By 11:24 p.m. I was gone. At 1:07 a.m. she texted, "Where are you?" At 1:13, "Is this a joke?" I turned my phone over on the passenger seat. Let the screen flash against the empty cabin. I didn't read the rest. By morning she'd left 3 voicemails. No tears, not yet, just escalating confusion. She didn't understand the silence. She had spent months building a narrative where I was distant, inattentive, emotionally dull. A partner she could outsmart and dismiss. Now the silence meant something different, because I wasn't confused, I wasn't reacting, I wasn't asking questions, I was done. And the thing about a quiet exit is that it strips away her performance. There was no fight for her to win, no guilt to deflect, no apology to perform, just a house, a stack of truth, a manila envelope, and a missing husband. Let her read it. Let her stare at the transfers and timelines and realize how little she'd hidden. Let her discover that I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't accused, hadn't begged. I had only listened and walked away mid-sentence. By 9 a.m. she'd sent 12 texts. Some were clipped. "You're not serious. Come back." Some were softer. "We can talk about this. Please, I didn't know you were feeling like this." That one made me pause. Not because it hurt, but because of how carefully it avoided naming anything. "Feeling like this." As if my departure was emotional, not factual, as if this was about misunderstanding, not mismanagement. By noon, the texts slowed. By 4 p.m., they stopped. That night, a mutual friend reached out. "Hey man, just checking in. Everything okay with you too? She said you had a breakdown or something." Breakdown. That's what she was running with. I typed and deleted 3 versions of a reply. In the end, I sent a screenshot, just one. A single bank transfer labeled consulting retainer with the date circled. He didn't reply. That was all I sent. That was all I needed to send. She began calling the next day. Blocked number, voicemail after voicemail. Her voice shifting with each one, from confusion to anger to something closer to panic. I didn't listen to most of them. The words weren't meant for me. They were sound checks for a story she hadn't finished writing yet. She needed me to speak so she could shape the narrative, so she could pivot. Instead, I gave her nothing, not to punish her, not out of spite, but because silence was the only honest language left between us. At the 3rd attempt to reach me, she drove to my work. The receptionist messaged me from the front desk. "Your wife's here, should I send her back?" I replied, "No, please tell her I'm not available." 15 minutes later, she left. I watched from the security monitor as she adjusted her sunglasses and tried not to look flustered. The next morning, I emailed HR, quietly updated my emergency contact, changed my address on file. I wasn't hiding, I was removing her access. She tried again that weekend, this time with a softer pitch, a voice memo. Her voice quieter now, shaken. "I don't know what you think you saw. I know we've been distant. I know I've made mistakes, but we can come back from this. We always do." There it was, "we always do." As if the endurance of the cycle proved its value, as if survival was success. I forwarded the full file to my attorney. No edits, no preamble. I had the legal protection started by Monday. She reached out to my sister next, told her I'd disappeared, that she was blindsided. My sister responded with a single line, "You weren't misled, you were watched." I hadn't told her much, but she'd seen enough. By Tuesday, I heard from her father. "She's not herself," he said. "She's worried sick." I thanked him for the call, said I was safe. Told him there would be documents arriving soon and I hoped he'd read them before taking sides. He went quiet, then hung up. The silence was spreading now, not mine but hers. She debuilt her world on reflexive lines, familiar defenses, but now there was nothing coming back to affirm her version. No argument, no fight, no correction, just an echo, bouncing off empty walls. She wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid of not being able to explain it. The divorce papers were delivered by courier, not to be cruel but to be clear. She signed for them in the rain. I know because her lawyer mentioned it when mine confirmed receipt, said she looked stunned. As if the papers arrived before she decided what story to tell about them. That was the end of my involvement. I didn't ask how she reacted. I didn't ask how she was doing. I already knew. The week after the documents landed, she posted a photo of herself smiling on a hiking trail. Alone, filtered, captioned. "Sometimes you have to lose what's familiar to find what's real." The performance was back, public-facing, curated detachment, but her silence behind the scenes told the truth. She stopped calling, stopped messaging, stopped trying to spin what couldn't be spun. She must have realized eventually. There would be no confrontation, no final argument, no shouted climax to wrap it all up, because the ending had already happened, in my head, in my choices. In the moment I stopped responding to her lines and left while she was still talking. She used to accuse me of shutting down. She never understood that silence is its own kind of sentence, not passive, not fearful, final. The file I gave to my attorney handled everything else. Financial division, property clarification, personal accounts. There was no contest. She didn't fight for anything beyond what was expected. That told me more than anything she could have said. This hadn't been a mistake. It had been a design, and now that it was exposed, she had no incentive to defend it. People ask me now once in a while what happened. Close friends, mostly. The ones who knew us knew me. They ask carefully. I never tell them the whole story. Not because I'm protecting her, because I don't need to explain, not anymore. The version of me that needed validation, that man's gone. Left the night I printed that file and drove off into silence. Now when people ask, I say, "We weren't who we thought we were." And they nod. Because everyone understands that line in their own way. There's no drama in how it ended. No shattered plates or screaming at 2 a.m., no lawyers on speakerphone during dinner. I left mid-sentence, and that silence said more than I ever could. She still doesn't know exactly when I stopped loving her, still doesn't know the moment I heard everything she thought I missed. She doesn't need to. Let her sit with the silence. Let her replay the words she used to weaponize, trying to decode the final moment. It was the day she said, "You never listen." And I stopped. Not to prove a point, not to punish her, but because I finally understood she was right. I wasn't listening to her anymore. I was listening to myself, and I believed what I heard.